Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Crowdfundr Roundtable Discussions. I'm your host Simon Maggots. Now, if you enjoyed today's conversation, go back and check out earlier episodes, and if you feel like you have expertise to share, contact us through either of our social media accounts. We would love to hear from you. And without further ado, here's today's episode. Well, hello everybody. My name is Simon, and welcome to the fourth episode, I believe, of Crowdfundr Roundtable Discussions. It's very fun. Today's the Kids and Young Adult Comic Spotlight. All of you are people who create comics in the YA or kid-oriented space. They have Patrick Lugo, who has done a comic called A Tiger's Tale. He's been working in freelance since the 90s. And Ken Lamug, who is an awards-winning children's book illustrator for his book A Box Tale. He also does kids comics, one book called Mischief and Mayhem, I believe.
Yep.
And we also have Alexis Fajardo, who is actually an Eisner Award-winning editor and cartoonist, who does the comic Kid Beowulf, which is very accoladed. And so, lots of very exciting things to talk about. So, if we want to start with Patrick, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got into making comics and specifically comics for kids?
Oh, well, you might find me online as Plugo. I'm an author, illustrator, and comic creator. I spent maybe the past couple of decades also as art director for the iconic Kung Fu magazine. So not comics, but it relied heavily in sequential art. But that didn't keep me from doing my own comics or the occasional kid book illustration. My most recent comic, A Tiger's Tale, actually got started in the back pages of that magazine, and it proved popular enough that I was able to maintain it for a number of years before eventually, taking it off the back page, putting it on the art table, and developing it as the graphic novel, which I just crowdfunded over the past couple of years. So that's been my lifestyle. I learned how to read sitting on my dad's lap, reading comics that I had kind of stolen from my older brother. That's also how I learned how to draw. So it's comics have always been a part of who I am and how I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we can all relate to that a little bit.
For sure.
Now, Ken, how about yourself?
My name is Ken Lamug. I'm currently residing here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm originally from Manila, Philippines, where I grew up for about half of my life and moved here with the entire family to the US when I was 17 years old. I used to draw when I was young, but life took a turn and stopped drawing for a long time until maybe about 13 years ago. I kind of got back into it. I was telling you guys little bit earlier, it was kind of an outlet, to be creative and be passionate about something, because I work in IT, so I wanted to have a creative outlet. So that's how I got into creating my own stories, things that I wanted to, create when I was a kid. I had the opportunity to finally do it, and so I had to learn how to draw again, basically, and look at what's out there, what's in the market. And I got into just meeting a bunch of comic book people, and how I found out how entrepreneurial they are, how creative they are. They didn't have to rely on, like getting an agent or trying to go through all these different hurdles. They just did it, right? They just made comics and shared it. And so that's kind of how it got started for me. And I was lucky enough to find an agent and get into the children's space, children's picture book publishing, and got some of my books created. And that's kind of how my Mischief and Mayhem graphic novel got started. It started off as a children's picture book, a 32-page picture book. But the publisher was like, we like this idea, but we want you to turn it into a 250-page graphic novel. Mm-hmm. And so that was like, wow, okay, can I really pull that off? And so that's kind of how it got started for me. And I've been super thankful for all the people that have supported me along the way. And, working on more of my own passion projects, the Petro graphic novel, which is what I'm going to be crowdfunding this time. and it's going to be on the second book. So I'm hoping to get that launched and get everybody excited for it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's super fun. That's super intimidating. Was that Mischief and Mayhem your first like complete comic work?
I've done some shorter ones. So that's the cool thing about working in comics, right? Is you're able to, I want to work with a bunch of other people and create a 4-pager for this anthology or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You get started in a kind of like a low barrier of entry, even if you build your experience. And so that's how it started for me. And then it went up to, 4 pages to 24 pages and 50 pages. And the one before that was about 160 pages, but that was for the Petra book, and it was mostly wordless and not as many illustrations per page, but it's still a lot of experience putting into that. And so it taught me a lot about myself, if I could pull off a bigger project, how long it would take me, all these different things. And like I said, it wasn't a full-time gig for me. It was something that I had to do during my off hours. So I really had to, don't ignore the wife and kids sometimes, but I'll just be like, okay, I'm working on something. I'll just ignore everyone for now. And so, yeah, it was a learning experience, but it's a slow building of my repertoire, I guess, my abilities. So
yeah, that's great. Now, Alexis, how about yourself? You've been in the space a little while.
Yeah. My name is Lex Fajardo, and like Ken and Patrick, I've been making comics all my life. I would consider myself a self-taught cartoonist, and a self-taught self-publisher and crowdfunder and all that stuff. And I think that's probably just because comics, there's a very low barrier to entry in terms of tools, paper, pencil, and then you need time. But I split my time between making my own comics, specifically Kid Beowulf, which is a graphic novel series that somehow I've been doing for 20 years. That's a weird thing. And then which I thoroughly enjoy, but then, I think partly it's taken 20 years because I split time with a day job where I'm editorial director at the Charles Schultz studio in Santa Rosa, where we work on licensed books and product and whatnot. So, and I've been there for about 16 years. And between all that, it's just like, for me, living like Patrick in that headspace of comics and reading comics and trying to get better at comics and really thankful to engage with other folks who make comics and learn about their experiences. And so it's so I'm excited to bring my next project to Crowdfundr. Prior to that, I've crowdfunded on Kickstarter and had success there, but this seemed like a great opportunity for this July spotlight. So really just keyed into that coming up soon and helping people who want to do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell us more about this current project that you're running right now.
Sure. So for those who don't know, Kid Beowulf, the short log line is it's inspired by the old epic story of Beowulf, which was about a big Viking who went around killing monsters. They forced a lot of us to read it in high school. I fell in love with it, and I decided to do a riff on that, in which Beowulf the Viking and Grendel the monster are 12-year-old twin brothers, and they travel across Europe and Asia, meeting epic heroes therein. If you're a fan of Bone or Usagi Yojimbo or Wings of Fire, it sort of has that aesthetic. And the new book is a collection of short stories. It's called Songs and Sagas. And it's about 228 pages. And this is a collection of stories that I've done over the years that are really just side little stories that I couldn't fit into the larger books. And I finally had enough of them to put into an actual book. So there are 4 main books in the series that take Beowulf from Grendel from Sweden into Italy. And this new collection is the stories in between the stories. And we get to dive deep into some side characters. You learn a little bit more about Beowulf and Grendel. There are also storytelling challenges for me too. For instance, I think, Ken, you mentioned you did a wordless comic. So I wanted to actually try, what is that like to do just a 20-page pantomime comic? So that was one story. Another was could I do a short 15-page comedic story? Because like a lot of my stories are 200 pages. So it's like, well, can I drill down and just do something short and sweet? So that's sort of what these stories are. It's me sort of slowly leveling up in storytelling, but also hopefully just making some fun stories for people to read too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Now, for all of you, have these projects that you've kind of been working on for a decent chunk of time. At the very beginning, when you were setting out to begin these projects, how did you go about that? How did you get all of these projects off the ground?
Sure. So my project that I started off with for the graphic novel side was the longest one was this one, Petro and the Flea King. So ever since I was a kid, I've always wanted to create I guess a little bit like Lex, a mythology, a folk tale, and kind of evolve it, right? So this story was based off of a popular Filipino character from a folk tale called Juan Tamad, which is basically Lazy Juan. Juan is his name, and so this boy he always tries to find shortcuts in different things, right? And so the origin of the story was that his mom or his grandmother sends him into town because he broke a cooking pot, and so sends him into town to buy a replacement. And so he buys a replacement, but then he breaks it again, and so he now has to find out a way of like making money. So what he does is he grinds up the pot that he broke and turns it into a powder. And he finds out that the town was having a flea epidemic, basically. So he starts selling the powder to the town people and saying, like this is a cure for it. And people started buying into it, and obviously it gets him into more trouble, right? And so that's kind of how the story of Petro and the Flea King started. Was I took that idea of that character and I expanded it and I made it into my own. So instead of Juan, I called him Petro, and he goes into this adventure of basically exploring the Filipino culture, the mythology, the different characters and monsters, and through that process finds out a way of saving his town. And so for me, when I came up with that idea, I've always wanted to create a story that's been influenced by Filipino mythology, and I wanted to also create it in a way where I didn't like put words in it because it could be a hindrance if I put like Filipino words or language in there. And so I decided, okay, well, let's give this a try, making it a wordless book. And so it was a big challenge because it was going to be the longest at that time, the longest book that I've created. And I didn't know, if I could pull it off. And so I went ahead and I did it. I finished it in maybe around between 4 to 5 months or so. It's about 160 pages. And it was just kind of drawing it every night. And the really cool thing about it was that after I was able to publish it, is that when I started selling it at comic book events, a lot of teachers responded to the book in a positive way because they're saying that they're able to show this to kids who are hesitant readers. And the kids were super into it because they were not intimidated by the words. And they would actually start making up their own dialogue or their own stories based on the images. So I was blown away. I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that. And so that's kind of how that idea started for that book. And, it's not like a bestseller kind of thing, but it's more of a passion project, And so that's how I wanted to go into book number 2 is how do I continue Petro's story and really just, do something interesting, something new. But at the same time, no pressure, kind of like the first one, just see what I can do with it and get everybody excited about it. So.
Oh, that's great. Now, that's fun that I feel like Petro and Kid Beowulf have some parallels.
Yeah.
The use of mythology and everything, which is really fun.
Let me just finish the trifecta because A Tiger's Tale relies heavily on martial arts mythology. So
perfect.
We're all kind of playing in the same sandbox. I originally pitched it to the publishers of Kung Fu magazine because while I worked as a designer for them, I still had aspirations to break into, the comics industry. And so, asking them, let me just do a comic in the back page just so that I could develop my own chops. And we worked it out together that I would base the comic on a lot of the oral history that we would pick up from the various kung fu masters that I had the good fortune to work with, directing photo shoots and, laying out their cover stories. So I would just build this whole folder of just their mythology and their concepts, their oral history. And then I would, turn them into like 1 or 2 page comics in the back of every issue. So that really allowed me to like dial in how much story and how much lesson I could deliver in 1 page. And then it met with success, but eventually the magazine kind of changed how its format was. And so the comic strip kind of fell into a little bit of a developmental limbo. We were trying to get it animated, and that really didn't lead anywhere. But I kept working on it as a project. What if I could take these little 1-page strips and turn it into a more comprehensive story? And I built it around the concept that for martial arts, it's not the lion, it's the tiger that's the king of beasts. But then also within martial arts, there are all sorts of mythical creatures, phoenixes and dragons. So how is it that a tiger could be considered, on par with a dragon or these other mythical creatures? And so the comic strip kind of explored that. But once the pandemic struck, the print magazine folded, and that forced me to kind of move more towards, my other great love, which was comics. And so the one unifying thing that we should mention is the organization Kids Comics Unite, which I've been fortunate to meet both of these gentlemen on through that, community. And it was through there where I kind of rekindled my own passion, and then also got the wherewithal to put the book together into a graphic novel and really approach it from a self-publishing standpoint, and really find the audience that was there, but they just needed to be aligned and moved in one direction. And with the help of Lex in particular, who was a good friend over the course of that particular time period, he helped me a lot in getting that package just right, or getting that campaign just right. So thanks, Lex. I appreciate that.
That was my pleasure. It was super fun to see Tiger's Tail take root and take hold. And because even, like you said, you've been working on it for a while, and I've seen its different iterations, and the final package is it's a good looking book. Yeah, I think that's the other thing. I mean, I don't recall, Simon, your original question, but I was just sort of thinking, listening to Ken and Patrick, the challenges of making comics is there's the creative challenge of what is the story you're going to tell? How are you going to tell it? Do you even have the narrative chops, whether it's visual or literary, to do it? And then there's a whole other piece of how do I publish this thing, which is just I came up in the artist alleys and conventions and constantly pitching to publishers my stuff. And over the years, just the graphic novel industry has changed. I mean, the comics industry has changed. I mean, we're sort of talking about it in terms of graphic novels, which is a whole other thing. And I think the marketplace is becoming more educated, not just through their creators, but I think all the different points, whether you're a publisher or a publicist or an agent or what have you. But when you're sort of doing it on your own, there's just so many plates you have to juggle. And I think to compete in this marketplace of graphic novels, you have to present something that looks like it's going to stand on the shelf. And I think that's part of the conversations that Patrick and I would have during, Kids Comics Unite. And it's how is this book going to look? And how do you make a product that somebody isn't going to pass up because it looks as professional as anything else out there?
Yeah, and those are all good questions as well. There are a lot of challenges. How did you overcome those? And what did you learn from what your all of because you've done a few different campaigns. You've been doing Kid Beowulf for 20 years. What have you learned from self-publishing against people who have big publishing money behind them?
Right. I mean, I know personally for me, a lot of it is the aesthetic. It's sort of what brought me into comics to begin with. As I mentioned, when I describe my book, I describe it in terms of the comics that I like or that I want to emulate. So, for instance, Jeff Smith's Bone or Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo. So when I think about those books and the audience they have garnered, I sort of want to put my book in that same camp. So, so oftentimes, that's a visual aesthetic I'm working toward. But when I'm actually packaging the book, when I'm designing it in InDesign or looking at printers, and this is advice that I give to other folks who have asked me, and Ken and Patrick might have their own point of view too, but I often tell them, well, go to Barnes and Noble, go to a local comic book shop, see what's on the shelf, see what's grabbing your eye. Like, what is the trim size? What is the page count? What are the colors that they're using? What's the design aesthetic that seems to, that you're gravitating to? And if your book aligns with that, if your story aligns with that, maybe take some of those elements and incorporate it into your own package. Because that's the other thing, like being in the trenches of Artist Alley and comic conventions for years, you learn quick what somebody's going to, whether they're going to walk over your table or not and engage with your concept, and learn very quickly, like how to describe your story, what aesthetics people are drawn to, and what sells and what doesn't. And you have to really adapt, whether it's the course of that 2-day show or a 20-year career, or it's just constantly iterating and just sort of fine tuning and getting better. Those would be my recommendations.
How about you, Ken, along the similar path, challenges and lessons learned along the way?
Yeah, Lex made some really great points there. But at the same time, I don't want to be contrarian, but if I just wanted to sell stuff, I would just make prints of superheroes all day. Because that's what I've seen, right? You set up your original art, one that you've worked on day and night, and then right next to you, there's somebody selling prints of Marvel stuff, and everybody just flocks to that. Or you're paired next to a table where they have trinkets of earrings, and all the ladies go there and buy that. So I'm like, why am I here in this spot? So it's very challenging, and I'm always conflicted about this, right? Because I want to be able to obviously make some stuff that the market likes, but at the same time, I got to find something that I'm true to, what my own style, that I just don't want to be a copycat, right? Because you can copy somebody's style, or you can copy something similar, and I think that's the safe play. And a lot of publishers, that's what they look for when they're looking for books to publish or to sign. They're looking for, okay, does this look like something that's a hot seller right now? And that's how you end up with a lot of this very similar types of comics and graphic novels and things like that. And so that becomes a challenge, especially for us who are trying to stand out and trying to build our own brand, our unique identity. And I guess that's where crowdfunding comes into play, right? Where you're able to reach your own audience out there. Hopefully they're there, and be able to, build your brand, build your confidence, your experience, and, be able to true to what you're trying to create. So it's finding that balance. Like the Petro graphic novel, it's very niche. I feel like it's targeting to a lot of Filipinos will love it. Like, oh, I've known this. I grew up with this, right? It's so familiar to me. But some people, a lot of publishers like wordless. We're trying to sell it to schools. Schools want words in their books because they're trying to encourage kids to read. They don't see the other aspect of it. So you kind of have to fight for that and say like, well, this is the value of this book. So there's a lot so I kind of like pin myself in a corner. So that's why for me, being a creator of this kind of book, I have to be passionate about it and be able to silence the noise and, create it because I love the character, I love the story, and this is something that I want to create, whether other people like it or not. So it's really finding that balance. I mean, I've had my success doing books that are very appealing visually to kids, and I love it because it connects me with the kids, right? If I create like Mischief and Mayhem, right, this has a very familiar aesthetic, right? You're like, oh wow, that looks kind of like maybe like Dogman or Captain Underpants, like that's what kids see when they see this book. And which is great because I go to school and I show this to them, and they're just pumped. They're so excited about the characters, the stories. But at the same time, my Petro book is something that it's very I'm passionate about, and it's a little bit different. So it's trying to find that balance. And I think being artists, being creators, we kind of go back and forth. It depends on the mood that we're in. At least for me, right? Some days I can work on something that's more of a mainstream type. Some days I'm like, I don't want to do that. So it's a lot of back and forth for me. But for Petro, that's kind of where I stand for it. And I'm hoping that, the audience will connect with that. So yeah, I don't know if I made sense, but.
No, absolutely. That was great. How about yourself, Patrick?
Well, I mean, I think what Ken said makes a lot of sense. And actually, I think that the unifying thing that connects what Ken is saying from what Lex is saying is the knowing one's audience, right? And that's where crowdfunding really, excels, right? Because it gives you the chance to really like zoom in on who is your audience and really try and appeal to them. For my project, right, in particular, A Tiger's Tale, right? It's the young martial artist, right? How many people have been sent to a Taekwondo class as a little kid, or who are sending their own kids to those classes, right? And often, they're punching and they're kicking, but they may not necessarily understand why. So being able to tell the parents or tell the cool uncle, hey, this comic will help them understand why. Or to tell the martial artist, hey, you want your students to also pick up the habit of reading? Why don't you have my comic in your martial arts school so that there's another reason for the kids to come back and another reason for the parents to trust their kids at that school? And so a lot of that, when I spent about a year writing query letters to agents and to editors, like the format of the query letter kind of left out some of that extra like behind the story, whereas crowdfunding really allowed me to put that story right at the front, front and center. Not only is it a comic book, not only is it a comic book about martial arts and talking animals, etc., dragons, but it's also based on these philosophies. It's based on the stuff that's in the back, right? There's back matter, so the youngster can read the fictional version, but then they can go to the back and read some of the definitions, right? So it's like those things that I couldn't really effectively convey to an overworked editor or agent, but I could, record a video, post it online, and let those people who are already enthusiastic, express that enthusiasm. Kind of stumbled on that word. My apologies. But yeah, so I think that's the thing that Crowdfundr really, excels at. And so it's a fortunate opportunity to be able to dial into that specific dynamic, and give people a story and not just the story in terms of that's contained within the pages, but the story of the campaign, the story of, hey, it's Lunar New Year, it's the year of the tiger. Let's put this comic book out there, like whatever that story is, being able to share that part of it on a crowdfunding platform, I think makes the difference for a lot of independent creators.
Yeah, absolutely.
Patrick, you're really good at that. I mean, all of our titles are super niche. I mean, I'm doing something on epic poet, making a comic out of epic poetry. So it's just sort of like, but I was just going to say, in the campaigns you've run, Patrick, you're very good at dialing in on that niche and leaning into it. And I think that it's a good lesson to learn, because I always personally have a challenge of like, well, I'm doing my comic for like-minded readers who like action, adventure, mythology, all that stuff. But it's also for kids, but I also want to break out of that. And so it's like, with each campaign, it's sort of like, what is the language that I need to come up with that is going to be helpful and direct and simple enough that, because that's the other thing I find, people just don't have a lot of time, especially when they're going through Crowdfundr and Kickstarter pages. They kind of want to know immediately, what is it? What's the log line? What is this about? Am I going to back it? Do I like this person and their story? And so it's personally always sort of been challenging, like, well, who's the audience I'm talking to this time? And how do I get them on board with this particular book? So it's a long way of me saying you Patrick, you do a good job of zeroing in on that. So
all 100 of them, right?
No, that's great. Yeah, that's one thing that we keep coming back to every episode is, you basically have to try to find, what your niche is and find the people who will show up to, pick up your book, because no one will buy it if they don't pick it up, and if they're not interested in the material. And there's all of these different things we have to do to try to draw the people in, to try to even look at what we're trying to make. And I know that one way that a lot of newer books, especially kids comics, are being discovered is through libraries. And libraries, it seems in the past decade or so, have really ramped up how much support that they do for kids comics. Have you each had much experience dealing with libraries and all of that?
Well, for me, it was only a few years ago where you go to a library down the street and there was no graphic novel section. And now it's packed, because it really encourages the kids to pick up a book and read, which is great. And it's, I guess, less intimidating, right, than a typical book. And they can get into mythology, they can get into Beowulf without having to read a really thick text and with language that's a little bit dated sometimes, so it gets confusing. So I think it's great, and it's really evolved. And you can go to Barnes and Nobles or any bookstore and you can see how it's evolved there too. So it's really fun in that regard, and it's really cool that I think our books are probably at the libraries or we can go like the library event that I'm going to today. I'm presenting to a bunch of kids, and it's a great opportunity to connect with them and really talk to your readers and see what they're into. And it just warms my heart to have that opportunity. I think that's probably an unexpected. I really wasn't, because I'm more of like, I'd rather just focus on the drawing and stay in my cave. So going in public, doing Zooms and things like that, it's like I have to flip the switch, right? And be like, oh, hey, everybody, look at me. So, but it was kind of a blessing, I guess, in a way, a reward, where when you do get to engage with your readers, it's just amazing, the feeling, the energy that you get. And so, being able to go to get your books at the libraries, getting teachers to champion it, librarians to champion it, is something that is really great. And so I think that's definitely something that a lot of kids and YA or any creator needs to be able to do, is to get it in there. And I think now with a lot of online publishing, they have that ability now, right? It makes it so much easier. Before you had to get your ISBN, you had to fill out this form, send it to the library district, and then they review it and then they have to vet and make sure that you're not a fraud. You're just like, is this just a guy who made photocopies of his comic and then said, is telling everybody that he has a book, that it's legitimate? They want press releases, all these different things to prove that you're legit. But now it's a little bit more accessible, which is great for creators like us.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have something to add, Patrick?
Well, I've encountered a lot of really sympathetic librarians who are really enthusiastic to like expand what their individual libraries offer. And I've also found like the local library sponsored book fair, right, opens up this whole other avenue. I think that's kind of echoing what Ken was saying, right? The librarians are really invested in getting their readers exposed to as many new books as possible. And so while the bureaucracy might take a little bit of time to get that book officially, shelved, the individuals really are making an effort. Librarians are all of our heroes, whether they're acknowledged or not. And on the most basic level is just that their desire to see their readers encounter new books.
Yeah, they're definitely, and currently they're on the front lines. I mean, sadly, book bans are becoming more of a thing, which is ludicrous to say in this country, but it's true. But Simon, to your point earlier, like the last 20 odd years, the prevalence of graphic novels, the fact that each of us are, self-published and published with our own books, and those are appearing in schools and libraries, is because of the dedication of those librarians getting those kids to want to read. Yeah, and I would encourage other creators who are listening to this that those are the places where if you have a book that's sort of in that niche category that's speaking to a kids or YA audience, that exploring things like ALA or book festivals or those more literary focused shows, you'll probably actually have more success than some of those Comic-Cons that Ken and I have been, where they're selling superhero prints next door.
Yeah, and I've tried to focus a lot on the smaller shows just around town. I really need to do a better job of going to the bigger shows. It's just limiting for me as far as resources, having, a job, taking days off, that kind of thing. And so I focused a lot on the local stuff. And sometimes I have a feeling like I probably break even as far as financing when it comes to smaller shows, because there's not a lot of overhead costs with that regard. But at the same time, you meet a lot of the teachers and librarians going to these local shows, and they see, oh, you're a local, can we have you at our schools, or, that kind of thing. So it's a really great opportunity to meet them there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And to what you were saying earlier about, competing against superhero prints and other stuff, there's a lot of people who make comics and crowdfund and self-publish, and there's a lot of people who do it in general space or more adult-oriented space. Are there any interesting challenges that you had having to market specifically to something that's a younger audience?
I think the key trick that I have found is to try and seek out those cool aunts and uncles, right? Because especially on a crowdfunding platform, it's not likely that a kid's going to be allowed to go and, create an account, et cetera, right? So they're kind of a little bit locked out. And then, parents, what parent isn't, so busy that they've got something else they got to do first before they can log on. But I've found that it's those aunts and those uncles who are like, oh, I've heard about your art. Oh, that I heard that my niece or nephew is going to start, Taekwondo classes, or, they're going to summer camp, or they love to read, like whatever the case is, like being able to find like those people. And there's no one rule of how to do it, right? You got to kind of like follow the chain of interest, right? Like what are the interests that they also have that I might share, and then, tapping into them and getting them excited seems to have worked. But one thing I also wanted to circle back on, because with talking about local shows and local book fairs, it reminded me that Lex just came back from some overseas book fairs. So I was just curious, about the potential for comparing and contrasting that particular phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick is referencing I was invited to a show in Germany, which was exciting, and it was through the sort of the Peanuts connection. So I got to bring Peanuts there, and then share my own stuff. And it was really the show was fun. It was very homegrown, actually. It reminded me a lot of the shows that I've done locally, some of which that have been actually put on by librarians who wanted local authors who were doing comics, and to share them with a young audience. And in this case, this show was bringing in artists from neighboring countries. It's in a part of Germany that's right next to Belgium. It's right next to France, and so which of course has a really vibrant comics community. So they kind of pulled the folks in, and then they got this Yahoo from California to come too. So it was really fun. It was an interesting learning experience because I'd never been to a European festival. And truthfully, they're not really different from the shows we do here. You've got like the same sort of people that we're describing in Artist Alley, and those same challenges of like bringing a pretty niche book to an entirely new market and trying to bridge the gap, so to speak, and interest them in an entirely new brand and story. And it was successful. It was really fun. To bring my work. I'd actually done a little Ashcan comic that I'd translated a little bit into German to sort of make that leap, to make it easier for them to see the work. So it was a great experience. I hope to do more of those in the future. Yeah.
I have a question for you, Lex, with in regards to that. So I have this perception that European publishers take more risks when it comes to publishing, I guess, more experimental type of graphic novels and comics versus US publishers. Is that just a perception of mine, or is that you think that's more accurate or truer?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I've also felt that too. Like I think that a lot of that is because of the history of the European comic, which they call bande dessinée, and they have the big beautiful albums that are maybe on average 60 pages long, and they're often hardcover, and they're bigger than our 6x9 books, and those cartoonists are working like a full year on these beautiful tomes. It's not too different from the manga industry in the sense that both of those cultures, they never had the stumbling block that I think we had in America, where late around the 50s, the comics suddenly were banned again and looked at and as this awful trash that kids shouldn't be reading, and that really stunted, I think, the perception in America about what comics were, and we're only starting to get out of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you made a good contrast with a manga. I'm just thinking, like, culturally in Japan, right? Corporations can have their own mascots. Right here in America, it's very rare you would see a professional, Fuji Motor Company or whatever having like a character as their mascot, and it's a very visual culture where if you look at their magazines, everything is like shouting or screaming at you. There's anime characters down the streets, that kind of thing. Where here in the U.S., you rarely see that kind of representation. So I think maybe in that regard, they're a little bit more mature. Or
I would agree. It seems as though that comics has been totally embraced in the culture, which is why I think you don't see, as I said, I think in America there's the stigma is it's the superhero comic. At least that's the perception from others looking in. I know those of us who are in the industry, we see all sorts of different things, but in Europe and in Japan, it's all genres, all stories. It's just the storytelling form happens to be comics. So, but I think we're making strides. I think all the stuff that's being produced now is all crosses all genres, all storytelling styles. It's really exciting to see. One thing that I did also notice in the European show was they love American comics, but they love American superhero comics too. So me bringing this weird thing about their heroes from Europe, they were a little like, wait, what is this? Like, I thought you'd be doing superhero comics. So it was sort of like it was a funny little thing to see. Like, okay, well, yeah. I guess that tracks. So.
So it wasn't prints of other Vikings that you were competing against, and
no. I had, like usual, I had the entire Artist Alley devoted to me and my weird book. So, but Ken, I have a question for you, because you had Mischief and Mayhem is your other project, right? Which would you consider is more mainstream commercial than Petra?
Yeah, so Mischief and Mayhem was published through HarperCollins.
Okay.
So that was a 2-book project, And so that would be more mainstream. We got a publisher's backing, went into the bookstores right away, got translated in several languages. So that would be, I guess, a more mainstream project.
Yeah, which seems like a really exciting experience. So having gone through that as an artist and creator, and I'm just wondering, like, are there any things that worked well in that experience that would bring over to your crowdfunding experience? Like, is there a crossover between the two that is beneficial?
I think I learned a couple different things. So when I first did the Mischief book number 1, I worked with an editor. So a lot of it I had to script and send to the editor to be reviewed, approve the script, there's a lot of back and forth. And in the second book, she felt confident enough in the story of the characters in my writing that we kind of skipped that whole part, like just start drawing this. And so it was kind of like an A/B test between the first book and the second book. And so I was able to cut the production time in half in the second book. And so I learned a lot of different, illustration techniques and things like that allowed it to go faster in the second book for sure. And I think I just apply those same techniques that I've learned into my own projects as well. But I think mostly it was really working with the editorial team, the book designer team, the art director, those kinds of things. And the certain requirements that the publishers have. One of the, I guess, bigger mistakes that I made was in Mischief book number 1 was that the publisher had their machines had a different set of CMYK black that I had to use. So I was using the wrong black. So apparently if it printed out, it would come out dull or something like that. So I had to go back and redo all the blacks, which in a comic, everything is basically, outlined in black. So I was like, okay, maybe that's the first question that I ask in my next project. It's like, what's your, CMYK code for black that your machine is using? So it was a lot of little things like that. But overall, it was a pleasant experience, and is just really sticking to the schedule. And it was a fast production timeline to finish book number 1. If you look at Dav Pilkey, he's pumping out, 2 books a year or something. He's like saying he might have assistants or so, but I think they were trying to, if this guy can do it, we need to be at that same pace too, right? And
it's unreasonable.
Yeah.
Frankly. It's just 200 pages. I don't know how Dave Pilkey does it.
Yeah.
But in terms of marketing, was there something that you seemed that they did that was successful with your book that you would bring over to your new project?
They did a lot of social media campaigns and things like that, and so that helped. But I think the personal outreach of the author was probably one of the more effective ones, and that requires a lot of your own time and kind of like just going out there and reaching out to schools and different events and things like that. So yeah.
Do you think that that's something that you'll do just yourself for your next self-published project?
Yeah, definitely. I learned a lot. I was really intimidated in the beginning, and now that I look back at it, I just keep telling myself I should have done it sooner, right? Because the outreach, I feel like I've always felt like, I don't have enough to show. I don't have my project. It's not this. I'm going to do it on the next project. That's going to be better. And now I feel like, I should have just done it from the very beginning, because there's always going to be an audience out there that's going to connect with your story, that's going to connect with your characters, your illustrations, and it doesn't matter if you feel like maybe it's not to that level yet, or it could be better next time around. There's always somebody that's going to be inspired. And, sometimes you don't hear it until they tell you like, your presentation, because I presented at schools where it's a bunch of teenagers, and usually you don't get any reaction from them. They're kind of just like stoic, like they're bored out of their mind. They'd be on the phone, but then you get that one kid who'll pull you back, or sometimes you'll see them at a different book event later. Like, you really inspired me, or, you got me into this, or the parents would be like, oh yeah, he talked about you nonstop. I'm like, really? He was bored when I was there, So yeah, I feel like those little things really help and keep keep your creative juices, your motivation going. So I feel like, even for your health as a creator, I think it's good to make that connection. And so it's a balance of trying to, for me at least, I just want to work on my book versus getting out and actually meeting the audience and the readers. So
yeah, you have to strike that balance between the only way to make a book is to be at the drawing table and put the hours in drawing it, but then also you have to put the hours in to sell it, and you can't do both.
Right,
right. We all try for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, some creators out there have formed and successfully formed teams, right? Where there's a front end person that can market it and things like that, and there's somebody in the back end that just focuses on the stories and the art. I'm not at that stage, unfortunately, so I'm just like a one man machine right now, working on stuff, and probably same with you guys.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Even when you gotta like do the rewards, it's me with the packing tape, putting together the boxes and doing the little notes, and like it's a one person program. So. Right,
and that's one of the things I think I mentioned a while back, was that the shipping costs have just gone wild now, and so I'm like, how do I even ship this to Canada? It's going to be so expensive to send it out. The audience can't afford it. I can't afford it. So,
yeah, it's been fascinating. It's a mixed blessing. I find that I have a fair number of fans who are overseas, and they're in Australia, they're in Europe. I think this is a holdover from a brief window of time when I was doing record album covers, and so I've got these people interested in my art overseas, but they're excited to support my book, but now I've got to, send this book overseas, and that becomes a whole other layer of planning and production and packing.
Right.
But it's, you've got to find your audience where they are, and you got to meet them halfway. So it's just part of the game, like having worked in magazines where publishing, where the publisher is taking care of every other aspect, and all I do is come in and just do my bit and leave. It's been eye-opening to see all of the other, moving parts that are involved, and it's really fascinating to track, right? How much time you spend coloring those panels, coloring those pages, and how much time you spend answering those emails and making sure that you got the right time and date to show up for a Zoom call,
Right. I tried to pay my my teenager back then for coloring Mischief and Mayhem, and I think he did like 25 pages and he gave up, but he still wanted to get paid. So
right, contracts, that's a whole other wrinkle. But I mean, one thing that's been fascinating, I've been working with Kids Comics Unite to bring a handful of other members of that community to Crowdfundr. And we've got like a specific boot camp program that we're working on. And it's very much focused on getting each individual to really clarify what their project is and what that story is that they want to, not just in terms of this, once again, not just the story between the pages or between the covers, but the story of why, whether it's their love for bird watching or their love for baking, like these other skills and these other passions that are behind that project. And I think we all have that. I think for however skilled we are at making comics, there are these other things that we know. And I think crowdfunding is really exceptional in its ability to give us the opportunity to really use those extra skills, or those, what's a good word? Not obvious skills that we might possess, or those other passions that we have that we could bring to a crowdfunding campaign. Whereas a traditional publisher may not be as interested in, Lex's love for baking. I don't know if you do love baking, Lex, but I just wanted to use a convenient example.
Right. I wonder, it's funny because when I was originally going to do a crowdfunder for my book on Kickstarter in July. And I actually had set up the page, and was figuring out all the rewards, figuring out the story. Patrick, like, who am I talking to here? Because I had done a couple of good, successful Kickstarters in 2020, 2021 for the most recent books. So for this new book, I was all set to do Kickstarter. And then I heard about the Crowdfundr switch over with the Kids YA and its connection to Kids Comics Unite. And it was also, going to focus it on July. And so I decided to take the switch and actually just do the Crowdfundr, as opposed to splitting, like, hey, maybe I'll try it on. At first I thought, oh, maybe I'll have the campaign on Kickstarter because I have dedicated backers there, and then half the campaign on Crowdfundr. Then I thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't split that because it's just so hard to narrow in people on one place. So I'm just going all in with Crowdfundr, and fingers crossed. I guess where I'm going with this is the fact that it seems more and more challenging to do a Crowdfundr, to do it successfully in the spaces like Kickstarter and others, because I think social media has taken a real hit with the last couple of years. And I don't know if you guys have experienced this yourselves. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm excited about the July and the focus of kids and YA creators, because I think that will certainly help at least define the stories for these new books that we're doing, and hopefully bring in that readership too. But at the same time, I'm a little nervous because I've never done it with Crowdfundr before. And there's so many things, like, once you do a Kickstarter, you kind of understand the language of Kickstarter and like how that petri dish works. And now it's sort of like, how does this one work? And just trying to get as much info from folks about who have done crowdfunders. What are the things we don't know? I have no idea. I'm just sort of throwing that out to the crowd. But if you've experienced, as you're developing your own campaigns, if you found things that you think Crowdfundr work does better than Kickstarter versus, I think there are lots of neat tips and tricks that it has that Kickstarter does not have, that I'm trying to lean into. So,
well, I definitely, you let me take a look at your campaign on Crowdfundr, and the immediate thing that impacted me was how cohesive your page looked. Like, I've been to your website a couple of times, so I know what it looks like, and to see how your Crowdfundr page just seamlessly connects with the rest of your online presence. I mean, that was kind of really mind-blowing for me, because, there has been a lot of like shifting around in like how comic book readers are approaching crowdfunding, right? Like, I think there was a bit of a bubble that rose around the 2020, 2021 time period, where everyone had a little bit of extra money. Everyone wanted more stuff to consume. It was as though they were all locked up in their house with nothing to do, but then here we are at 2021 and 2022, and, there's not as much available money for people to just throw at crowdfunding campaigns. And you can kind of see those numbers go up and go down a little bit. But I think part of it was that there was an initial artificial inflation that was great, because it helped create like a culture around crowdfunding. And then now I think it's kind of leveling off to reflect a more accurate picture of who's interested in, our individual books. But it's still there's a little bit of guesswork. I think it's a little bit like gambling, but it's not. I hate to use that simile, but it's that sense of it's like a game, right? So there's a very gamified quality to the whole thing, where, at least for myself and for the people that I'm helping, I'm trying to approach it as though it is a game. If you can get these things, if you can get these ducks in a row, then you have a better chance of, getting the number that you want, whether it's through a dice roll or a roulette wheel, or, through crowdfunding. But that's kind of what my impression is of it. And as I learn more, I've realized it's so much more about, our relationship to our readers and our audience. And I don't know, I'm curious to see. I suspect Crowdfundr as a platform can act much more transparently than, say, a platform like Kickstarter, which is still kind of framed within its own branding, its own color scheme, its own, like, you know, network. And kind of in a way how, like, Facebook is its own ecosystem as opposed to the internet in general. So I'm kind of starting to think, and I don't know, I mean, it's got to be tested, right? But I kind of think Crowdfundr has a little bit of that kind of transparency, right? Where we can make it our own thing as opposed to fitting into a very specified structure that some of the other platforms have. And so yeah, it'll be fun to really see what those limits are and try and, you know, set up a program, set up a campaign to succeed, but also set up the campaign to stress test little ideas and theories. But I have a habit of being experimental even with my own
You're much braver than I am, Patrick.
Well, I'll tell you what, my last crowdfunding campaign really gave me an intimate appreciation for Dr. Jekyll. You know, why would you experiment with something so personal, you know?
Right. Interesting.
I mean, I do like the aspect of bringing in the kids and YA audience to one spot for a whole month. And so that'll at the least give exposure to all of those projects, you know, kind of funneling everybody there. That's kids and YA audience. So I think that's a great part of it. As far as outreach, I remember my last crowdfunding was way back, 2013, 2014, for a comic that I did. And you could email a lot of these comic book related websites, send them a press release, and they'll put it up, right? Back then it wasn't a lot in the market. So they'll actually support you by, hey, check out this guy's crowdfunding campaign. We don't know who he is, but it sounds interesting. Here, we'll post it on the front page of the website. Now they're very picky. So it's an even harder outreach to a lot of those websites. I mean, I'm still collecting my list of contacts and seeing who I can reach out to and, you know, sending that out there. But it is, I think, a big part of it. It's going to have to be, right, your audience that you've already made that connection with in the past. So, and being somebody who's living in the cave most of the time, I'm going to be like, hello, remember me? You know, I'm still here. Please give me some money. So, yeah, so it's going to be interesting. But, you know, no pressure, right? We're doing it because we love the books. We're doing it because, you know, these are things that we're going to do anyways, at least for me. I'm going to do this project one way or the other. It might just take longer. Right. So, you know, that's kind of how I'm approaching it. Because the last crowdfunding was just way too much stress for me. You know, it's really like you just got to put the shame to the side and be like, you know, like just get in everybody's face in a way. I'm just like, oh man, this is not my personality. I'm not sure if I can handle this.
It's hard. It's super hard to do it for a month. And that's sort of the game. And that's like the trade-off you make where you're like, okay, I'm just going to be annoying for a month, 31 days. Yeah. You guys are just going to have to deal with it. But right, I will say, for me, switching over from Kickstarter, which is the all or nothing approach, which I think was really part of that anxiety that I certainly feel during a campaign. Mm-hmm. And then you have the options with Crowdfundr. You can do, I think, all or nothing, or keep it all, or you have more options. Yeah. So knowing that was certainly like, that took a lot of stress off my shoulders. Like, okay, well, like you say, Ken, it's like, well, it's an experiment. You can see how it's going to go. I'm going to do the book regardless, but now I'm not totally on the hook, whether this thing makes everything or not. And that certainly felt like, for me at least, like, oh, well, I can try this. I'll throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. So I was thankful for that option, Crowdfundr.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that maneuverability or that adaptability, I think is gold, you know, because each of one of us can probably take it and tweak it to apply to our own sensibilities, our own particular styles. And Ken, to your point, you know, I think we all have the chance to act out the Amazon recommendation robot and just be like, if you liked my story on martial arts, you might like Ken's story on Filipino mythology, you know, like there might be there's one of the key things that we as creatives can do is build those bridges so that, we could lend each other that bit of pull, that bit of interest that comes in the wake of our audiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you found that some specific pull quotes helped your campaigns?
It's for myself, I've been fortunate to be able to get pull quotes from people who I know their opinions matter to the people I'm trying to reach out to.
Mm-hmm.
So, getting a pull quote from an artist that I personally admire may not make a lot of headway for some of the readers I'm trying to attract, right? Mm-hmm. But getting a pull quote from, say, the publisher of Kung Fu Magazine, right, who's an old friend of mine, but he's the publisher of Kung Fu Magazine. And so him saying that this comic has good Kung Fu will mean a lot to the people who I'm trying to get interested, right? So it's that question of who do I know that I can get a pull quote from, and do they have that pull with the people I'm seeking to draw? And so it's a little bit of a balancing act, if you can kind of find someone who fits within that Venn diagram, then send them a free copy of your book at the very least.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I personally, pull quotes are tricky because, like Patrick says, I think as the creator, we are hungry to get that validation from our peers, from people whose books we admire and emulate, or people who are in the industry, or a good review from Kirkus or whatever. And if you get it, oh, it's great, and you're just going to plaster it all over the place because that's validation that your stuff is worth reading. And actually, in the first iteration of the Crowdfundr page that I did, because I only knew Kickstarter, I actually skinned it to look sort of just like the Kickstarter page with your rewards on the left-hand side and your story, and then pull quotes from different creators and whatnot. And I was going through that first draft. And I'm like, oh man, this takes forever to read. I'm getting bored. Somebody who comes to this page is going to be bored. And then so I started to rethink the point of at least this campaign from my point of view, which was that spotlight, which was the kids YA, and we're probably reaching out to librarians, we're probably reaching out to teachers and parents, and so using actually another cool thing about Crowdfundr, they have all these different templates that you can create your page to. I kind of did it more as a storefront and kind of tried to keep that story very specific to who is this book for? In my eyes, it's for a 12-year-old who likes mythology and adventure and the parents thereof and the cool uncle that Patrick knows. And then I thought, okay, well, what about the pull quotes? Well, I've got a lot of really great fan feedback from my readers, the 12 and 9-year-olds. I'm going to put those in because that actually, I think, might have more impact than the Kirkus review or that artist who I really admire, whose pull quote is great, and I want to put it on there. But that kid doesn't know who that is. So I really tried to, when I did this new page, take those things to heart and well, who am I speaking to? And maybe finding pull quotes and a message that was a little bit more direct to my readership. I don't know if it's going to work. I have no idea. I like how it's presenting, but it's all, like we said, this whole thing is just a big learning curve. So I don't know.
Yeah, that was part of the. So go ahead, Ken.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I was going to look at the different storefront options and play around with that, because that's an interesting idea to try out. I try not to use as much pull quotes, but I do have, I guess, a bunch of different logos of publications and things like that I put at the bottom of the page, which shows where the book's been talked about. So I just put logos up there. And links to those websites. So I don't know how effective it's going to be. I mean, it looks cool to have them up there. But yeah, we'll see.
Do you find that any of the awards that you've won have helped sell any books?
I think so. To a certain extent, it helps. I think more so than anything, it's really does the audience connect with the story that you're trying to tell and the art? That's probably more important than, you know, the award. The award thing is like a bonus. You can win an award for anything these days, right? You know, like submit it to, you know, an unknown place, and then he got a bronze award or something, and you can say that you're award winning, right? So there's only really, at least in the industry, a few awards that matter. You know, especially like in the publishing industry, they know those awards. So if you say I won this award from they're going to be like, oh, that's not real. So, so, you know, it's cool. Especially when I was starting, it was very helpful to put that out there. I was a nobody. I had nothing to lose. But now it's just kind of a sidebar type thing. So,
yeah, it's just anything you can do to make yourself seem as credible to the people who are looking at your book for the first time.
Yeah, and it's really about putting in the work, right? When I started, nobody knew me. I didn't know anything. How do I get started? It's the same thing my kids ask me sometimes, you know, like, well, I want to get into, you know, design or art or whatever. And how do I get started? Well, get started, make something, right? And so that's how it started for me. If I wanted to be an artist or a comic book creator, I have to make a comic. I can't wait for somebody to come to me and say, can you draw my comic? You know, and so it's the same thing with the awards, let's say, you know, like I want to win an award. So how do I do it? Well, enter it into a competition or something, and then see if, you know, if it's good enough to win an award. And so you just have to start from something and build on it. And eventually you just keep building and you get, you know, more and more and higher. And so that's kind of how I look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Did Patrick or Lex have anything to add to that?
Patrick, go ahead.
I don't know. I've designed a lot of awards as one of my freelance jobs, and so that's always interesting. You know, some of them have been just participation trophies too. So
right.
it's an interesting phenomenon. But I think it comes back to like who you're talking to, right? Like to be able to say, you know, my comic was, you know, mentioned in a written review on Publishers Weekly, and they said it was a knockout, right? That's great to be able to say for people who read Publishers Weekly, you know, like the 12-year-old kid that I'm trying to sell a tiger's tail to is going to be like, what are you talking about? So, I mean, I think as artists, right, we are besieged by like a culture that wants to either monetize our work or considers it mostly irrelevant, right? And AI could do it instead. So anything that we as artists can do to help, you know, maintain our sense of dignity, our sense of like, we're doing it not just because we love it, but because there's some value that others are finding in it. I think that's essential, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's where being able to mention any kind of recognition, you know, has a value to us individually, whether or not, you know, it makes a difference in sales. You know, sometimes yes, sometimes no, but you know, it might help us sleep at night to know that, oh, somebody read it and got that inside joke that I slipped in there, you know?
Yeah, I think that's even more important than an award, actually. Like I went to a presentation and there was this kid that showed up and he's like, I love your drawing, that hot dog that you drew in this. I'm like, hot dog? What hot dog is that? And it's like, here on page 56. And it's like a one panel of a character wearing a hot dog outfit. I didn't even remember what it was. And the parent was like, yeah, my kid won't stop talking about this dang hot dog outfit. So I'm like, okay, that's good. That's really cool. You know, yeah.
Coming to a cosplay convention, you know, in your town in the neighborhood, right?
Right. So, yeah.
That's great. No, I think we're just a little over the hour mark. We're happy to, you know, keep going as long as you guys are around, but we can start wrapping things up if you guys want. But with that said, I know all of you have projects that are currently live or upcoming. And if any of you have any final thoughts as well, yeah.
My final thought is that I'm gonna give Lex and Patrick my money already, so they've got it.
Well, I think I'm excited to see everybody's projects. That's for sure. Because we all seem to be dialed into a very similar creative niche, which is it's always fun to meet other creators who are inspired by similar things. But Simon, is there something we haven't covered that you think listeners would want to know?
I feel like a lot of these things, they keep coming down to, you really have to put the work in. And I think maybe the one thing that maybe we've touched on and maybe haven't quite talked about as much as how do you all budget your time for all of these projects? Because I know that not all of you do it full time as well, and that could be something that I know is pretty challenging. Is to, how much time do you set aside to, only be drawing and ignore the world, and how much time do you set aside from, your other side gigs or other freelance work to, promote your independent project and so on,
Yeah, I mean, I can speak first. I mean, I have a specific 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So those hours are generally spoken for. But so for me, it's a lot of it is just getting up before that other job starts to start my first job and crank away either at writing, research, drawing pages before the day job starts and after the day job ends, and then weekends. I have a very forgiving wife who understands that it takes a long time to draw comics, and yeah, it's just chipping away. It really is, and it's tough. I think when you are a creative because you never feel.
Lex,
We'll
froze.
never know.
And it is to your work, and then to your life, and then to your friends, and to your own well-being. It's really hard to juggle all that. So I just try and chip away as much as I can.
Yeah.
Lex, you dropped off at around will never.
Oh, I said I will never stop. So no, I was just going to say it's just a matter of chipping away, and comics is an ad sum. So the more pages you do, the more you'll have at the end. So
yeah. Wise words. The more pages you do, the more you'll have at the end. I want to quote that.
I've reconciled myself to not sleeping very much. I mean, I'm being funny, but I'm also being genuine in that I don't, if I'm tired and I need to sleep, I'll sleep, but I won't spend time tossing and turning, trying to sleep. Like if I find that, it's going to be a late night, then I might as well be productive and go do something productive. And I think that sense of just, finding opportunities to be productive is always going to be key, and I try and keep track of, I have the weird little notebook that helps me keep track of like actual hours, spent on a given, task. And I often find that I don't spend as much time as I'd like to think that I do, but that's valuable information, right? So I think kind of being aware of like what I want to do and then compare, and then what I have the bandwidth to do, and constantly keeping that negotiation fresh, I think is key. Projects come and go, and I have for better or for worse, I have a habit of keeping a lot of things like in my head and just kind of keeping track of, when I'm expected to be where. And I think that helps, but that's like unique to my own method of doing things. And along those lines is a sense of fun, right? Trying to make things into a game. So like that little book that I showed you is also a little bit of a game, because if I can get X number of boxes filled in, that's an accomplishment. If there are more boxes filled in today than there were yesterday, then my score has gone up. And it's those ways of how I can keep myself motivated, how I can keep having fun, I think, pays off at the end of a week, when I can just kind of take a day to relax, or, when the dog says, today we're going to spend a little extra time out in nature, and okay, well, that's what we're doing today. And it's a good thing that I logged my hours earlier, or I'll have to log them that night, but it's a Friday, so maybe I'll stay up an extra hour. So I think a lot of those kind of personal life hacks, I guess, would be a modern way of describing those little methods. I think for an artist or for a creative individual, they're essential.
Yeah, especially when I feel like as artists, we tend to deprioritize our own work above other things sometimes.
So true. Yeah, I'm probably more in between Lex and Patrick, trying to find that in between time between work, waking up early in the morning and working at night. And at the same time, kind of like Patrick, where I actually started to keep a log of how much time I'm spending on the project, just for personal curiosity to see, if, I guess, doing the math later on and saying, okay, is it worth it? I mean, it's worth it in the end, right? But is it financially worth it? But you find out it's not. but setting milestones is important for me, especially for crowdfunding, where you're kind of, promising your audience, I want to get it done by a certain time. So setting that milestone is important, like having half of the book finished by this date, having publishing starting by this date, all these different milestones. So it's very important. One of the funny anecdotes that real thing that happened for me was that when I was working on my Mischief book, I found out, like, man, I'm always in pain, my neck, my back, my shoulder, like hunched over. Mm-hmm. And then a good friend of mine was like, yeah, go get a massage. And I kind of got hooked in it, like, man, I'm spending a lot of money on massages. Now I'm like, I think that's where all my money's going. So, but you got to take care of yourself, right? Because if you want to be productive and you want to create quality work, then you got to be at that mental state where you're healthy, you're happy, and you got to be in the zone, and not allow all these distractions. It's so easy to be distracted. And, you get distracted one time and you got to find that momentum again to get back into the zone and get back and working. But once you're in the zone, it's like you're churning these things way faster than you would think. But it's maintaining that pace. It's really important. And so, yeah, just setting those milestones and sticking to it. And I think a lot of these guys are professionals. They know, what their abilities are, the limitations, and how to get back into the train and, keep working. So I think that's the benefit of having the experience and doing it, is yourself a little bit more, and you can find that balance. So
yeah, Ken, that's a great point. I mean, it's like being a creative athlete. You have to know what you need creatively to keep being creative and to take care of yourself, and to just, when you're at the table, you got to switch it on and work, whatever that means, whatever you accomplish that day. And that's the only way you're going to get it done. But it's a great description you put forth.
Yeah. What's the adage? It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it reminds me of one hack that I think I'll share, because I have found it works on a couple of levels. We're all artists trying to get our stuff out there, right? And like Lex said, social media is kind of taking a bit of a nosedive. What is it? Mm-hmm. What is it? A technologist friend of mine called it the great vibe shift that's happening right now. Mm. So how do you create what you're trying to create, the book, right? And then how do you create content, because you still need to feed that bottomless pit. And so what I discovered when I was working on a children's book, a picture book that, they gave me a super tight deadline. So I ended up doing time-lapse photography of the artwork while I was painting it. And then I would review that artwork after the fact. And that allowed me to see where I was spending my time, right? Like those 3 hours of painting were compressed to about 5-10 minutes. And I could see, like, okay, wait a minute, I'm spending way too much time just painting blades of grass. I should be focusing on the main character. Mm-hmm. So that allowed me to meet a really tight deadline, because over the course of generating that artwork, I could make adjustments. So essential for getting stuff done. But then after the fact, I had, hours of footage that I could then share on social media, and it's cool, right? Time that the speed painting, the time lapse stuff, very easy to share. But also there was a very quiet hidden lesson in there, because I could point out, look at this footage. Look how much time I wasted on blades of grass, don't do that. Focus on the main character, so it's just a great way to find lessons where you can, so that you can streamline your own process and become familiar with what you're doing as an artist. And these days now, it's so easy to do that time-lapse photography. We've all got it on our phone. You don't have to set up a fancy camera anymore, So there's a free tip for anyone who wants to give it a shot.
That's really cool. It's kind of like what Lex was saying. You're an athlete, you're videotaping yourself or recording yourself, seeing your performance and seeing where you need to improve, right? Like athletes do that, boxers, fighters, all these different things. They watch themselves, right? Watch tape. So it's the same thing. It's pretty cool.
Cool. That's the closest I've ever been to being called an athlete. Thank you.
Yeah, like that's the main thing, is to try to find ways to be more efficient as an artist. Because I do feel like it is the stuff like, having to do like all of the blades of grass that for some people is the part that keeps it from being as fun. Also, kind of trying to find all of those ways that you can, make work in a way that's quick but also satisfying.
And it's not to say that you shouldn't draw blades of grass, that piece might be about the blades of grass, right? But
exactly.
The point being is to know when you're putting that focus where it needs to be, and when you might have gotten a little bit distracted drawing all of the bricks that are going to, be in the background of that wall, and your mileage may vary, but I know I have found those lessons pretty valuable.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely, with the time lapses and everything too, I know sometimes it can be hard to try to think of things to be posting on social media, especially as it has been, it's just diminishing results. I feel like we all feel like the main way that we promote ourselves in today's society is predominantly through social media. And now that that's starting to go away, it's trying to think of reasons to, it's not away yet, and there's still value in being a part of it, but stuff like that, those time lapses, that helps you and it can give you some content, but it's not just trying to think of content just for the sake of posting it, which I think is the hardest thing to do.
Agreed.
But yeah, any other efficiency tips that anyone has been able to find over the many years of being artists?
I still work traditionally with paper and pen, so I have a lot of friends who have shifted to digital, which I think does actually afford much more efficient ways at closing the gap on the production timeline of a book. But it's hard enough for me to draw on paper, so I stick to that. And yeah, I don't know if my creative process is the most efficient, but it's time tested. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you've obviously honed your method of doing things that works, exactly for you.
Right.
How about yourself, Ken?
Oh, efficiency tips. I don't know. Find out the color of black first before you get started.
Right.
So, yeah, I have a feeling like it's one of those things everybody has a different style of of how they draw. It also depends on, are you drawing cartoons? Are you drawing something like, like a painting? So
Mm-hmm.
there's many ways of, creating those kinds of artwork and how to find shortcuts to do it. I wish I was more of the copy and paste type, where I can just copy and paste the same characters over and over. That would make life so much easier for me, but I feel like I'd just have to draw it from scratch, and that's how I get the energy into the illustrations. At least that's what I think. So, yeah, I don't really have any efficiency tips for you.
No, that's fine. Actually, I had another quick question for you, Ken, just out of curiosity. We were talking a little bit earlier about your experience with a bigger publisher versus independent publishing. And I was just curious with the way that they handled your book in a print side, in terms of the paper they put it on and everything like that. Was there anything that they did differently in terms of, how they actually, physically built the books that you were able to take anything away from?
Oh, to make it, it's pretty standard formatting for the book. I think they kind of like what you guys were talking about earlier, where they tried to match existing books in the marketplace, so it fits nicely on the bookshelf. So everything there wasn't anything super unique about how it was created. I think for different markets overseas, the books were a little bit bigger. Maybe the paper was more of like a newsprint type paper. The quality of the colors and everything still looked pretty good, but you can tell that it's not as glossy as in the US market as far as the paper. But everything else was pretty standard on it. So there wasn't really any surprises that popped up during the development stage. It was, a lot of it was kind of template based as far as the design of here's the cover, what's going to look like, where we're going to place the logo, that kind of stuff. I did wish that, kind of like what Patrick was saying, that I had recorded more of the process, because like you said, now everything is on social media. So I think I always feel a little bit self-conscious when I'm like, okay, setting the camera, recording, and I'm like looking at the camera like, so like somebody's watching me or something. So it's always a struggle trying to be consciously, I feel like I'm doing this for the recording instead of doing it to get it done. Like I'm performing for this.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh man, this is a struggle. So, but I think if I get past that, then you would have more social media content, more things to share with your readers. So that's something that I need to improve on.
Yeah, there's an endless list of things to improve on. Now, actually, Lex, you were in Germany earlier, and Ken, you mentioned that with Mischief and Mayhem, they had translations. Have any of you tried to get any of your independently published stuff translated and put out in other countries?
I have. Well, I guess, as I said, for that German show, I did a little ashcan because my characters actually did travel to that part of Germany, so I thought that'd be a fun thing to bring. I've thought about it because it'd be fun to get those books translated. But then I realized the amount of work it would be because the person doing it, because I'm sort of in this hybrid self-publisher, and then I have a traditional publisher for a couple of books, but the work would fall on me ultimately, I know. And so it's just sort of like, is that, talking about in terms of efficiency hacks, is that the most efficient thing to do for such a small readership that would glean, or is it just more efficient to just keep doing the news stories and hopefully do enough of them that Sony down the road would say, hey, well, translate those for you in another language? That seems to make more sense. As attractive as it would be to see my stuff in Spanish or French or German, it's just sort of like, at this point, it's hard enough for me to do it in English. So I'm just gonna stick with that, and maybe those opportunities will present themselves on their own.
Interestingly, the comic book that's featured in that anthology, Speculative Fiction for Dreamers, was bilingual, Spanish and English.
Oh,
characters
cool.
who spoke Spanish. Characters who spoke English. So I've experimented on that front, and along those lines, I've gotten like some of the offers. Like you want to translate A Tiger's Tale into Mandarin. But to Lex's point, right? It would be up to me to do a lot of that and then get it, checked, double checked, and triple checked because of, details that could be lost in the translation. And then it's just a question of the market. So it'd be fun to pursue further, but at this point, it's not, I think I need to get my audience a little bit more robust, so that there's more of a demand before I start making an offer and find that there's not that many people. most of the people who want to read my book are content with reading it in English, then I might as well have worked on the second book rather than to translate the first one.
Yeah, in my case, I don't have any of my independently published or crowdfunded books translated. The advantage of having a publisher do it, obviously, is the cost. You don't have to pay for the translation, and they know that they already have a deal in that market where there's a certain distribution for that book. So there's a benefit for them to translate it, and they know they're going to sell X amount in that market. So to do it ourselves as independent creators, then we would have to figure out distribution in that area, market it ourselves. So that's a whole nother thing that we would have to take on ourselves, I think. So it's better to just, put your minimal resources in creating book number 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of minimal resources, what print runs do you normally all go for with these campaigns? Like, what's the sweet spot you found for each of your books?
I've kept it very small, specific, like almost like maybe 150% of what my backer count is. So enough to cover those who have, pledged, who have pre-purchased, and then, about just over 50% more of that I can sell. I'd rather have a small print run and then be able to say that they sold out than to have a garage full of, 5,000 extra books that are just waiting there, So that's part of the perks of, digital printing, is that you can just go, I just want 150 with that cover, and then I'll take another 50 with a blank cover, because, I could draw on the blank cover and charge a little bit of extra, It's those little hustles, right? A hustle within a hustle. But that's how an artist has to make their ends meet these days.
Yeah, in the early days of when I crowdfunded, the printing dynamic was that you had to print a ton to get that great price point that you could then, just make the math work. But with the advent of digital technology now, like Patrick, I'm sort of doing these smaller runs, and it eases the stress and the anxiety of like, oh, I got all this stuff in my garage, I got to move. And you can, so my campaigns, the amount that I'm asking for is really kind of like the to cover some of those, those crowdfunder Kickstarter fees. It's not much more. It's just to get me that minimum print run. If I exceed it, great. I'll print more and I'll sell them at shows. But it's, we're talking artisanal publishing here, and I work with other things like Ingram Spark and whatnot to get a wider distribution, but those are really honestly more like in the print on demand space, just to offer the book for those who want it. But the crowdfunders and the Kickstarters are for that core readership who want that printed book, and that's just the landscape that I'm in currently. I have lots of friends who do these who have wildly successful Kickstarters that go 10 times over the campaign, and they'll do that beautiful, leather bound book and all that stuff, but then they'll have 1,000 copies of that sitting in their garage. So it's sort of, you just have to, I think, find the print run and the that works for you, that ends up with the product that you're proud of and that you can give to the backer who's going to be pleased with it. And that equation is different for every creator. So I think a lot of it is trial and error too. So
yeah, I'm gonna echo what Lex and Patrick have said. It's the same thing, keeping a low overhead cost. So yeah, usually about 150 prints over. So yeah, it's just keeping the backers happy and having a few to take at the conventions or to the events. And with the nature of digital printing, you can just order more. So no pressure.
You guys get
the quality of digital printing, I'm just going to interject, has gotten so much better. Like I really, for a long time, eschewed, POD and digital printing because at 5-10 years ago, it just wasn't where it was now. But now there's lots of strides made. So it's which benefits creators like us. So it's a good thing, good place to be.
Yeah, when I did my first crowdfunding campaign, I used a local printer. That was a friend of mine, and it was a short 50+ page comic, but I wanted it to be perfect bound instead of the staples. So we had a hard time trying to bind it. He had to find someone because it's so thin. It wasn't that thick, so it was an issue to find somebody to do that. But we ordered a small amount. The quality wasn't like the best of the best, but we made do with what we had, and the backers were happy. So it was a learning experience, but kind of like what Lex was saying, quality now for print on demand is so much better. You've got so many options for binding. You can do hardcover now. It's kind of wild, all the choices that you have. So it's just so much more convenient.
No, definitely. And like, who have you all been using for your printing? I mean, unless you don't want to say, but no, there's a lot of really great printers online, and I find that especially for some people watching, like I'm in Canada, so some of the things that are better for me are not quite the same as for some of you. But yeah, I'd be curious who you're all going through.
My last book, this book right there, was printed by Comics Impressions, and I have to say they really stood by their product. They really were like determined to make sure that I got exactly what I wanted from them. So, and at a good, within my necessary price point. So key detail, right?
Yeah, I've used.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, okay. Yeah, I've used just Comic Swells Springs. They're a popular one out there. I played around with Print Ninja. They have potential, but I just wasn't at that point because I think you have to order a large quantity from them. And I've used KDP for a lot of the stuff that are just black and white type books. I didn't need any fancy colors or fancy paper, so I would just use KDP, and super cheap. I think the prices went up, so I have to look at how much more it went up. But yeah, it's trying to just not to complicate things, I guess. But good thing about trying to find a good solution is it's not just the book itself, but all the collateral materials like stickers or bookmarks, all these other things that you could do through these companies, right? Because all those things become useful, especially when you're at a book event, you hand something out, all these promotional materials. So I think finding a good source is really important. And bookmarks can be really expensive too. I was surprised because it's just like, it's just a piece of paper, but dang, it's so expensive and pricey. So I tried to have a bunch of bookmarks made, but I printed them like in a 8 by 8.5 by 11 and went to like a Kinko's to cut them, right? So I paid someone at Kinko's and I did the math. I'm like, it came down to about the same price if I just ordered the bookmarks pre-cut already than me cutting it. So yeah.
I would just follow up. I've had printed all over the place, like I've done overseas printing, which I think Print Ninja would probably fall in that category, but like Ken says, you have to. I think to make that math work, you have to do those big, large print runs. Especially for my book and the new one is going to be 200 odd pages. It's full color throughout, so that's it's tougher to make those margins work if it's a full color book as opposed to black and white. Comics Wellspring, I've done some work with them, and their quality is very good. They're stateside. And I've done POD print runs with places like Ingram Spark, which the quality is very good. And the nice thing about Ingram Spark is that it also pushes it out to distribution hubs like Target, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, what have you, KDP as well. But that's sort of specific to Amazon, but it's good to be in that channel. And then and funny enough, Barnes and Noble has their own POD print outlet called BN Press, and they do good work too. So like as we said, the technology is getting a lot better. And I'm sort of in the process of doing proofs of the new book in all those different channels to see which one will look best and which one I want to go with for the final crowdfunder. But I would recommend them all.
Have you had this issue where, because like you were saying, if you get it into Ingram Spark, it's accessible through like libraries and they can look it up in their system, right? It shows up in the catalog and they can order it, which is really important. Have you had this issue where if you had it in multiple channels that it kind of conflicts, like it shows up more than once, but having a different ISBN? Like,
I have not, but I buy my ISBNs through Bowker as opposed to getting something that's pre-assigned from some of those, because some of those POD outlets you can assign an ISBN, which might be a part of that conflict you're talking about. So I've not experienced that. So for all my books, I go through the rigorous step of like getting your own ISBNs and even doing a Library of Congress number and all of that stuff. So the last couple of books that I've done through those channels it's worked out pretty well. And so when I search for the book online, whether it's Barnes and Noble, Target, Books a Million, whatever, it comes up properly. And I haven't heard anything negative about those people buying books from those places. So
yeah,
because the ultimate source is the Ingram Spark that's sort of funneling that final product to them. So
their print on demand seems to be something that I feel like there's a lot of people who were big independent comics creators in the 80s who were able to do self-publishing before everything with Diamond Distribution happened. And some of those same people are now finding success again doing things through print on demand. It seems like that's a very, very it's an avenue worth pursuing. I don't have as much experience in print on demand currently, but it seems like that's one that people should be looking into. Now with print on demand, I imagine for your own stuff, you would just order as many copies for yourself and resell them for shows.
Right.
Yeah. It's generally the. And again, like with all printing, a lot of it just comes down to finding the margin that makes sense for you as when you're moving from the creator into the publisher realm, you will also have to put the business hat on and try and like make sure that it makes sense. The margins are pretty tight. And that's sort of why, for me, a crowdfunder, I sort of sometimes view it as like, okay, well, this is going to be like one of those big conventions for the summer. Like, I'm just going to put a lot of energy into this online convention and make as much as I can because that will help fund the book. And that might be like the equivalent of what I make from the book outside of going to shows and hand selling them, because that's just the nature of the game these days. It's just a lot tougher, at least in my experience. And I do several shows a year. But that's, so the big push is sort of these Kickstarter campaigns and the crowdfunders to help earn back some of the money and time and investment you've made in creating this thing. So I don't know if you guys feel the same way or if you've had that experience.
Definitely. I wouldn't say that, I was able to live off of my last crowdfunding campaign for X amount of time, but in a way it kind of feels like that, because the work has already been done, the sleep has already been lost, but then once the campaign is done and then once the books have been printed and once they've been shipped out, if there's a little bit extra, if you can afford to back a few other campaigns, if you can afford to make a car payment or whatever, then you're a little bit ahead of the game, so more valuable than a car payment would be reinvesting in your next project. But, everyone's got their own, situation that they have to create art in. So there's always interesting to see what solutions come up as a result.
I thought you went to the Bahamas on your last crowdfunding campaign.
Oh, my bags are packed. As soon as this recording is over, I'm out of here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. Oftentimes when I go to book events, I'll personally lower down my prices and just so I can get the book on the kid's hand. That's kind of like, because a friend of mine showed up at one of the book events, like, you're how come you're selling it for this much? Like, you should be doubling your price. I'm like, well, I just want to get this to this kid, to the audience, basically. So I have no doubt a lot of the creators out there, crowdfunding people out there are doing the same. We just, we want to reach the audience, and our prayer is that hopefully over time it'll build into something later on where, it'll be more than what it is. And so I think it's a sacrifice that we make. So yeah, and I'm kind of I'm fine with it. I'm living with it. Like I said, I'm lucky enough to have a 9-to-5, so I'm able to supplement it with that. And it's a passion. We do it because we love it.
Yeah, the amount of costs that we are eating as creators is just, I don't know. Maybe you have a spreadsheet for that too, Patrick. I don't want to look at mine because I know it's a lot.
Yeah.
My spreadsheet is a drawer full of papers that I stuff more into than I ever look at. But one thing I wanted to mention that Ken, what you said really brought to mind was that it's interesting that through crowdfunding, right, the culture is as such where people are willing to spend a little bit more money to support that project than they would for an equivalent product that they find in the direct market or at a bookstore, right? They're willing to pay $20 for that copy, $30 for that copy, or whatever. But what I found really kind of fun and interesting is that the book's already been paid for. So what I'll do is print an even higher price on the cover so that when I'm selling at a convention or at a gallery, I can say 50% off, and it's still, it increases the appeal of the book. It still makes the book affordable. And it also gives me the chance to, to offer that good deal, right? Because I've kind of factored that price break into what the price is on the printed cover, even though the books have been printed already. So the costs have been covered. So that's been an interesting thing that I kind of stumbled upon, and it kind of works in an interesting way where I can offer the youngster, here, have this at 50% off. But then if someone is willing to be like, oh, I believe in you, I'll just pay full price, then that's a little, it helps make up for some of the sunk costs that we all, do. Because, we're not, if we really wanted to make a profit, there are more affordable ways that we could do so.
We would not be in comics if that were the case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
So, but I was just gonna say you can always lower the price. So and it's a lot tougher to raise it and not get a raised eyebrow at the same time. So it's a good tip, Patrick.
Absolutely. Now we're just at about the 2-hour mark, so I'd say that's probably about a good spot to wrap it up. And before we go, where can everybody find you online? Where can people find more of your work and throw some money your way?
Well, you can, if people are still following people on Twitter, I'm at Lex Fajardo Art. And that's the same handle for Instagram, which I post more there. So that's probably the best way to find me on the social. And then my website is kidbeowulf.com. And that's where the crowdfunder will be linked through. So that's a good spot to go now, or during the campaign. And I look forward to hopefully discovering more readers through this panel. It's been fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lex.
So you can purchase copies of A Tiger's Tale Volume 1 at atigerstale.com. Just remember to spell it like a story rather than a physical appendage, right? So it's TALE rather than TAIL. So, just to make matters a little more complicated, I suppose. But online, you can find me at Plugo, PLUGO, or Plugo Arts, PLUGO ARTS. And that's the URL for my main website, plugoarts.com, where I have a newsletter that I, produce monthly. I blog there. I have a bunch of samples of my art. I have a bunch of free comics, and a lot of my other resources are all funneled through plugoarts.com. So you can find me there. Drop a comment.
Cool. So you can find me at rabbleboy.com, RABBLEBOI.com. And it's the same thing for my social media handles, Rabbleboy on Twitter and Instagram. And I post my artwork and all that stuff online. And I'll be talking about the upcoming project on my website and all of my socials pretty soon, making a big announcement.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming down, spending a couple hours. It was fun. It was informative, I think.
Very.
Yeah.
Learned a lot.
It was a great time.
Fun. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks a lot, Simon. This
Thanks,
was
everyone.
fantastic. I'll see you guys around.
For sure.
Yeah, we'll see you at a show someday.
Take care.
Thanks.